Hello, I'm James Edgar. I am a applicant for a teaching position endorsed in social studies for DC Public Schools. This is a demonstration video of my teaching style. The students are all friends who have graciously committed some of their time to help me. I look forward to providing this and to working for you. Now, let's move on and learn something about World War II. Because what we're beginning here is a new unit, Unit 11.8, on the U.S. participation, the entry and conclusion of World War II. This is merely Lesson 1 of a unit that will last all week. So, let's see where we're at. Because, as we always do, we have a bell ringer to start our class. Today's bell ringer will be a think, pair, share. You know how this works, but I'll review it. I'll present a question for you. I'd like you to think about it. Here with someone next to you or behind you. Your normal partners will be fine. Discuss it. Come up with some points, something we can share. Something you think you don't know about, something you've learned about in your readings. I know you all did your homework over the weekend. That's good. And I hope you saw that baseball game. When did World War II begin? Generally, historians speak of 2 theaters of war. Is this accurate for World War II? What nations comprised the Allies? What nations comprised the Axis? Why don't you take about a minute, turn to your partner, and I'll wander around and make sure we're on target.
Yes.
I'm going 45.
Particular point when we got involved, but obviously Germany started building up for it in the 30s. And Russia.
Well, I'm hearing some wonderful thoughts here, and a number of points indicate that the reading has stimulated your thinking, and I hope encouraged you to go on and read from some other sources. This is excellent. Let's share what we've come up with. When did World War II begin? Any ideas? Who's got a date, maybe?
1930s.
Okay, I'll throw one out for you.
1930?
33?
Or is it 34?
39.
No.
1939. September 1st, 1939. Anybody remember from their readings or even watching a movie what caused it? What? Yes, Gene.
Germany invaded Poland?
Yes, they did. Germany invaded Poland. Historically, we know that Germany created that situation. They provoked Poland. Poland did not even respond. And Germany said, sure they did. And they invaded. Officially, World War II began on that date because when Poland was invaded, the treaty they had in place between Poland and Great Britain caused Great Britain to declare war on Germany. Great Britain also had a treaty in place with Russia, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't want to go fight the Germans, but they didn't like fascism because historically, as we know from reading about the rise of communism in the 1917 era, these 2 philosophies of government don't mix. We even saw that in Italy during the early part of the century. So, September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. I got a thought for you, though. 1931, so what, 14, 15 years after the end of World War I, with the Treaty of Versailles, as we recall from 2 weeks ago, Japan invaded Manchuria, creating a new company called Manchukuo. In that country, Japan put in place the last emperor of China to give it some sort of legitimacy. Could that have been the start of World War II? Shelley, what do you think?
I don't know.
Well, it was well after the end of World War I.
Right.
And it certainly was an example of the imperialism that we have come to see from Germany's Third Reich, trying to expand throughout not just Europe, but the Asia mainland as well. And North Africa with Italy's fascist government. So I think perhaps it's something you should consider when you look at this. Yes?
Question, sorry. So what was going on in Asia, at that point Hitler really hadn't connected with the Japanese yet, right?
That's true.
So these two things were kind of fomenting at the same time,
They were indeed.
but would eventually come together.
They do. Which brings us to, well, the second question then. See if any thoughts came up on this. We historically hear about the two theaters of war. And by the way, that term, theaters, is written in the English sense, which is not only used for Broadway and London's theater district, but spelled this way for theaters of war. And that's why I used it, so that you distinguish between entertainment and death. Now, two theaters of war, Europe and Asia, Pacific. Were there any others? Yeah.
North Africa, but I sort of think of that as sort of the same theater as Europe, in that it was Europeans coming down there.
That's true, it was, but it certainly involved another continent, didn't it?
Yeah.
You know? Ever hear of CBI? China, Burma, India, all separate theater of war. The Allied effort was led by General Vinegar Joe Stilwell. That wasn't the significance. The significance is that China was also fighting a civil war during World War II between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek. As we know, Mao won, but the United States propped up Chiang Kai-shek's government, the Nationalists, which some have said might even have been fascist itself. An interesting situation, I think. What nations comprise the Allies? I think we know this. Give me an answer, Kate.
Well, United Kingdom or Britain.
Yep, Great Britain
Great Britain.
and all the Commonwealth nations. Mhm. The last ally to join, who was it?
Russia.
United States.
Yeah.
United States. Interesting, huh? And, the Axis. Yes.
Well, obviously Germany, but, and whoever they incorporated into their
Mhm.
thing.
That's
But-
key, whoever they incorporate.
Incorporated, because it was domination, like,
Yes.
like they took over. And, obviously, Italy, Mussolini.
Yep.
And then eventually Japan too.
That's right.
So,
And as you were alluding to there, they're surrogate nations. For example, the Sudetenland, part of what is now Czechoslovakia. Hitler took that when Neville Chamberlain declared peace in our time by appeasing the beast and signing a treaty with Hitler. So, you got him. Very good. Okay, let's see what the facts are on this. Officially, the war started September 1st, 1939. As we've considered, maybe it started sooner, 1931. We know that Poland was invaded. Europe, Pacific, CBI, Africa. How about the home front? Was that a theater of war?
Talking about our home front?
Hmm?
In the sense that we got attacked by Japan, we became a theater of war, and we were worried about our border, our coastline, California.
That's right.
We were also fighting on this home front racism against people of Oriental descent, racism against people of African American descent. I think it was a theater of war.
Also too, some of my Jewish friends said there was, a lot of Jews were discriminated against even back then.
Yes, they were.
I mean, because there was there were Germans, there was a lot of friction between Germans
Yes.
and Jews of different origin, German, Polish, whatever.
That's absolutely true. In fact, during the period between the wars, the United States population, because of the great influx of immigration at the time, following World War I, when things were so difficult in Germany economically, the United States population of German heritage was larger than that of British heritage. So, was it easy for us to get into the war? Not against Germany, not at that time. I think an interesting fact. We know Great Britain, Soviet Union, the Commonwealth nations, China, the United States, Canada, of course, was a Commonwealth nation. They supported us. How about Mexico? Do you know where they came down?
Well,
They were neutral, which is interesting and significant because you'll remember from our studies during World War I, Zimmerman, the German foreign minister, had sent what's historically come to be called the Zimmerman telegram to Mexico and said, if you attack Texas, Arizona, Southern California, when we defeat the United States and the Allies, we'll give them back to you. The Zimmerman telegram. Interesting.
Well, I have a question. Mr.
Yes.
So Spain was actually, you never read about, I never heard about Spain,
Mhm.
so they were actually a neutral country too. weren't they?
Well, yes, Spain had their own problems
Right, they had their whole civil war going on too.
because of their own civil war between Franco and the Nationalists. But Spain was a proving ground for the weapons of World War II. Not only did Germany fight them, and Italy fought over there, and many North Americans, Canadians and Americans, citizens of the United States, go fight. But even the Soviet Union sent people, sent soldiers, or patriots, depending on how you look at it, from which side you were on. This isn't, of course, on European history or world history, but I will point out that even when that ended, the Spanish king lived in exile, so he wasn't gone forever. In fact, I believe just recently he passed away, or his son. Spain then became a hotbed of intrigue. I encourage you to watch one of the great movies of all time, which is based in historical fact, and that's Casablanca.
Oh, right. Oh,
So, okay, we know the Axis powers basically were Germany, Italy, and Japan. One quick thought about that. Did you hear the term Axis recently? And I'm not talking about math. Well, we heard about the axis of evil.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
Huh? Iraq, Iran, North Korea. That establishes some things culturally, societally, and a point of view. Keep that in mind when we move into the Cold War and then later. Okay, who was really fighting in this thing? Well, in Europe, I need my glasses. In Europe, we know Great Britain and France. You can see Spain here that you brought up, and Portugal. I don't think Portugal's been in a war since they fought on the Iberian Peninsula about 600 years ago. Pretty smart, huh? Down here in Morocco, in Casablanca, and that area, they did remain neutral ostensibly, but anybody know why? Okay, I'm going to throw out a term, and I think you've seen this in your readings, Vichy France. Vichy France. Vichy France, when you look at France here, is the part in the southeast that Germany did not invade because they rolled over and surrendered. and they collaborated with the Nazis. And Klaus Barbie, one of the worst butchers of the war, he was from that area,
Is that the south of France?
southeast, south.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay.
Yes.
So how could one part of a nation just choose to surrender and the rest of the nation not? And some part of it is-
It's a really good question, Katie, and I think the best way to understand it in this context is where you look at where were they? Where is that section? And it's by Italy, which was fascist. It's by Switzerland, which the western part of Switzerland, they speak French, so they had a cultural tie. And on top of that, they didn't want to get invaded, so they collaborated. Yes.
Hasn't, like, the South been wanting to be separate for quite some time, though?
I believe so.
Yeah.
You know, if you go far enough south, down toward Andorra,
The Basque?
that's Basque territory.
Uh-huh.
And they'd like to be free of Spain, as well as France. Of course, they'd end up landlocked, and who knows what would happen to them if tourists didn't show up, but, yes.
So the South rolled over, basically.
Yes, they did.
And then from there, Germans and, I guess, French pushed forward to take over the northern parts so that they.
Well, they had
were already
invaded, and
opposed.
they marched
They had
down
invaded that, oh, I see,
the
okay.
Champs-Élysées.
But the population of the north was hostile to, obviously.
Yes, that's
Where's
where
the
most
South?
of World War I had been fought, and so they really hated it. You know,
Is
the
that-
Germans came within 50 miles of Paris in World War I. In World War II, they finished it.
I heard the French had a lot of underground, I guess you could the French underground.
Yes, very much,
So
and we
that
will
was
get
more
to
the
that.
north? Oh, okay.
Yes, later in the week. Okay, now over here, there was a front down through the Balkans. Greece, a strong ally. Very strong partisan movement. You run through the whole Slavic area, Czechoslovakia, Austria, which of course went German very early in the 30s, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. They were just overrun. Why? Oil. Oil to fuel the war machine all through this area here called the Caucasus. Plus access to the Black Sea, pretty important. Okay, where's my... Moving to the Pacific. And I put that motion graphic thing in there for a reason. You'll notice it expanded this way, because that's the direction the Japanese empire headed out toward us. There's Wake. It fell a few weeks after Pearl Harbor. Hawaii up there a little bit to the east of the Word Ocean. But when Japan, and you see Manchukuo that we discussed, 1931, Japan invaded there. That was part of China. They had taken Korea just after the Battle of Tsushima Strait, which was a little bit before World War I. And they held on to it for 60 years, 50 years. But then Japan tried to move into China because they wanted labor resources and land resources, and key, they wanted to kick out Western powers. They wanted no Western influence in their domain, which they called the Greater Far East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. They also came down here towards Sumatra, the Java Sea, for oil. Yes?
So did the countries lose their names, or did they keep?
They would call them, Japan mostly let them call themselves what they were, except for this group here that we know as Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. You know why? Because the rest of the world called it French Indochina. So, we talked about CBI, China, Burma, India. Yeah.
So the French and the English were all over that place up to that point.
Yes, they
And the French
were.
were in, we described those countries like Vietnam, what have you,
Mhm.
and then the English were more in the Burma, India area.
Yes, they were. However, they did run down, all the way down through Malaysia.
Okay,
And they had their stronghold up there in Hong Kong,
okay.
which of course they held until, what, the late 70s when the treaty ran out.
So this affected all, that theater for, because you've got.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Okay, the U.S. entry into the war. Pre-war diplomacy. Lend-Lease. Have you heard of Lend-Lease? Do you see that in your readings? Basically what that was is we gave them all, Great Britain, all the war materials we could, and we let them owe us. Sort of like a credit card. Don't leave home without. And we did that for a reason, because we didn't want Hitler and fascism to take over Europe and maybe come bother us. The home front we've started to discuss, and on Wednesday we'll do a complete lesson on the home front. But as you go through your readings and your extensions, your homework, I'd like you to pay particular attention to the economics involved, to the race relations, and to what I consider one of the greatest positive events that came out of World War II. Women went to work in this country equally. Maybe not with equal pay, but that was incredible. You saw that picture. Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941. Sneak attack, 2 weeks in the making as far as the ships moving. Years in making as far as politics among nations. On December 8th, 1941, Franklin Delano Roosevelt spoke to Congress assembled. And as you'll learn next year in your government class, that means House and Senate together in one chamber to hear an address or statement from one of the other co-equal branches or equal branches of the government. Some of the greatest words ever written, and these, by the way, this is a primary source, is actually Roosevelt's handwriting. Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. We kicked them back to Tokyo, but we'll get to that by Thursday or Friday. So, I've asked you questions. Now you ask me something. You have any? Yes.
You mentioned that the U.S. was giving Britain war supplies.
Yes.
Were we giving any other countries war supplies? Or was it kind of...
Great question. We were not at that moment, but as soon as we entered the war, after the Atlantic Charter came into play, where Roosevelt and Churchill met on a destroyer, some call it frigate, but it really was destroyer size, up off of Nova Scotia in Canada, we started giving the Soviet Union supplies. We had to keep them in the war to keep the German 10 million man army divided. Any more?
Wow, didn't
Yeah,
know that.
okay.
So what was the significance of the document that you just showed from FDR's?
The significance of it is
Like, I mean, in terms of like the ending, like. you showed-
well, I find it significant as far as the actual writing of it and the editing of it, in the sense that Roosevelt was so emotionally committed to defending democracy that he didn't allow a speechwriter to write this. He didn't go with just some statement of, okay, we got, shot up, and this is really bad, and we got to go to war, and I want you guys to do this. He said, no, this document will go down in history, because we're making history here. And as a quick little aside on that, right after Pearl Harbor in January, certainly before the March Doolittle raid over Japan, that we'll get to, that incredible thing to take the war to their home country. And a historian of just amazing skills. Samuel Eliot Morrison, who was a Harvard history professor, went to Roosevelt and said, "Mr. President, no war has ever been written as it occurred. I'd like to do that." And Roosevelt said, "Absolutely." And Morrison, who was a captain in the United States Navy Reserve, was brought on active duty and sent to every major naval battle in both oceans during World War II. I strongly recommend you read his 15-volume set. Okay. Well, lacking. Oh,
I have a
Shelley.
question.
Yeah.
Why were all of the ships like in Pearl Harbor, and did Roosevelt, I mean, it just doesn't make sense why you'd put all of your eggs in one basket.
Well, you know, it's a great question, and it has its roots. Your question has its roots in what is known as revisionist history. As more and more documents come available, and as more and more historians are looking for something to write about, and as this country envelops its free speech, allowing conspiratorialists to come up with theories about everything, the concept of whether or not Roosevelt knew, and I say no American, great American, average American, even a bad American would let Americans die to get into war. There's another way. So, why were the ships there? We didn't know they were going to attack us. We did believe that they were building up to an attack, but we thought it was the Philippines.
Oh.
That's why we created something called War Plan Orange under the United States Navy. And we pictured Japan attacking the Philippines. And they indeed had been made aware that the Japanese fleet for a period of 2 weeks was out of radio contact. But nobody thought it'd be Pearl Harbor. Okay, let's review. I think we did. If there are no more questions, but I'll be glad to answer some, I got another thought. Let's take a quiz.
Uh-oh.
I prepared just a short 10-point quiz that we will, I'll pass out, and then we'll adjust the rest of the lesson based on your answers. And I'm done.